Imagine a box no larger than a small trunk, overlaid in beaten gold, so thin it gleams like beaten sunlight, set apart by law and taboo, whose handling required ritual precision, and whose misuse in the biblical narrative brings sudden death. That is the Ark of the Covenant, an object described with uncanny technical exactness in Exodus, treated as the visible locus of God's presence, and wrapped since antiquity in a web of ritual rules, military symbolism, miraculous stories, and finally, disappearance. Today we ask the question the ancient Israelites themselves would have posed. What is the truth behind the Ark of the Covenant? How was it made, and how was it actually used? Moses received the instructions on Sinai with a clarity that borders on the mechanical. Exodus 25:10-22 provides dimensions and materials in language that reads like a master carpenter's brief. Make an ark from acacia wood, its length, width, and height. Overlay it with pure gold inside and out. Fashion a gold molding around it. Make rings and poles for transport, and make a mercy seat with 2 cherubim of hammered work at either end. The text even specifies measurements. The ark's interior dimensions, rendered in cubits, come to roughly 1.15 meters long by 0.70 meters wide by 0.70 meters high, about 3.8 feet by 27.6 inches by 27.6 inches, approximately 3 ft 9 in long and 2 ft 4 in wide and tall. The instructions continue with materials: acacia wood, pure gold, fine linen, and later, by implication, the use of blue, purple, and scarlet yarns for related tabernacle textiles. The precision is striking. This is not a vague ritual idea. It is a manufactured object with exacting specifications. That precision raises a practical question at the heart of the story. The people building it were, by Israelite self-description, newly freed slaves. They had been in Egypt, not as an organized guild of carpenters and gold beaters, but as a population with limited means. Yet the narrative insists on artisanship of the highest order. The answer within the biblical account is both providential and pragmatic. God endows particular craftsmen with skill, and the people take spoils from Egypt that supply the necessary gold and fine fabrics. Exodus singles out 2 names: Bezalel, son of Uri, of the tribe of Judah, filled with the Spirit of God, with skill, ability, and knowledge in all kinds of crafts, and Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, who assisted him. These are not generic workmen. They are master artisans, endowed with a divine gift for metalwork, carving, and weaving. The narrative frames craft not merely as human skill, but as a mediated, God-given competence, a theological answer to the practical gap between command and capacity. Where did the raw materials come from? The text and the wider historical picture supply several sources. Exodus 12:2-13 tells of the Israelites leaving Egypt hastily, and Exodus 3:21-22 and 12:35-36 describe how the Egyptians gave them silver and gold and clothing. In later retellings and archaeological context, the Israelite economy of the monarchic period shows connections with Egypt and the Levantine coastal crafts and traders, Phoenician sources for dyed fabrics and metalwork, Egyptian craftsmen or techniques for gold beating, and local timber from acacia, prized for its durability and resistance to decay in dry climates. The narrative thus links divine instruction, gifted artisans, and circulating materials into a coherent logistics of manufacture. The construction itself, as described and as imagined by scholars and craftsmen, is a marvel of ancient design. The ark's core was acacia wood, hard, dense, and termite-resistant. The wood formed the structural box. Both inside and out, it was overlaid with pure gold. That implies a sandwich of materials: gold on the inside, wood as the core, gold on the outside. The gold was not solid. It was beaten into very thin sheets, worked until malleable, and then applied to the wood. Artisans in the ancient Near East used processes of hammering gold into foils, thin enough to overlay wooden or stone objects. The ark would have been built with joinery strong enough to hold its shape, then coated with gold and given a rim or moulding, an ornamental and functional band of gold reinforcing the lip. Rings were affixed to the sides, and poles were inserted through them, long poles of acacia wood overlaid with gold, so that transport was always pole-based and never by lifting with bare hands. The poles were not meant to be removed. They remained inserted so that the ark could be carried by Levites on their shoulders, with the box never touched directly. On top sat the mercy seat, the caporet, a gold lid featuring two cherubim facing each other and with wings spread toward the center. Exodus describes the cherubim as part of the lid's hammered work. Their placement turns the cover into a meeting place, where God would speak with Moses. Exodus 25-22. Archaeological imagination can add technical color without claiming knowledge. The gold sheets, beaten thin, would have been glued or pegged to the wood, with seams carefully hidden by the rim. Thin gold is ductile and can be worked into smooth surfaces. It takes a practiced hand to beat it into foils that cover a box with minimal wrinkling. The finished ark, by conservative modern estimates used by some researchers, could have weighed in the neighborhood of 150 kilograms, around 330 pounds, once layered with gold and furnished with poles and rings. That is heavy enough to require dedicated carriers and to explain why only prepared Levites transported it in ritual ways. When narrators and modern investigators step back from the craftsmanship to the question of function, the ark occupies a crowded conceptual space. It is simultaneously a cultic focus, a political symbol, a sacred container for relics, and, in the Hebrew Bible, an active participant in divine action. The contents attributed to the ark are both precise and theologically dense. The stone tablets inscribed with the Ten Commandments, Aaron's rod that budded, a sign of priestly legitimacy recounted in Numbers 17, and a jar of manna kept as a memorial. Exodus 16:32-34, Hebrews 9:4 refers to these items. Each object carried symbolism and function. The tablets represented the covenantal law, the rod symbolized priestly authority, and the manna recalled God's provision in the wilderness. The ark thus became not simply a safe for relics, but the physical locus where law, priesthood, and providence converge. That convergence is one reason the ark features heavily in narratives of power and presence. It is carried before the Israelites in several military episodes. At Jericho, Joshua's army marched around the city with the ark carried by priests, accompanied by priests blowing trumpets. On the seventh day, the walls fell. Joshua 6. The ark's presence functioned as an emblem of divine accompaniment in battle, a dramatic public sign that the God of Israel went before the people. Later, in times of Israelite war, armies sometimes carried the ark into battle as a talisman of divine favor. The story in 1 Samuel is an account of this practice gone tragically wrong. The Israelites bring the ark out from Shiloh to the battlefield against the Philistines, thinking its presence will assure victory. Yet they are routed, and the ark is captured. 1 Samuel 4. The Philistines experience calamities afterward, tumults in their cities and plagues, and eventually return the ark, but not without a narrative that insists the ark's presence was potent, but ritual and moral posture mattered as well. One modern approach to the ark's materiality asks a striking technical question. Could the construction itself yield physical phenomena that ancient observers would describe as divine action? In plain terms, a few researchers have proposed that the ark's layered composition, conductive gold, insulating wood, conductive gold, resembles the basic structure of a capacitor, a device that stores electric charge between conductive plates separated by an insulator. This is a hypothesis, not a conclusion. Stated carefully, The idea suggests that under certain conditions, dryness, materials contacting, mechanical or triboelectric charging, or even acoustic stimulation, the ark might have been capable of holding an unusual electrical potential. The cherubim at the lid's ends could in this frame be imagined as points where a discharge occurred, and a sudden discharge might have catastrophic effects on an unprotected person touching the lid. Some who raise this possibility point to biblical scenes like the death of Uzzah, who reached out to steady the ark and was struck down, 2 Samuel 6:6-7, as instances that, while primarily theological in the narrative, could also be read alongside physical mechanisms. This hypothesis invites careful caveats. First, wood is not a perfect insulator. Moisture, salt, and the presence of metal fittings could provide conductive pathways. Second, an ancient artisan's gold overlaying both interior and exterior creates a conductor-insulator-conductor sandwich only if the interior and exterior conductors are electrically isolated and a difference of potential is present. Third, the biblical descriptions do not include measurements of electrical properties or experimental data. They are theological narratives. Consequently, scholars who suggest electrical analogies typically frame them as imaginative, heuristic tools. They offer one way to bridge the ancient text's vivid reports of lethal contact and mysterious power with modern physical intuition. Alternative explanations are plentiful and have weight. The ark should be understood primarily as sacred, with biblical accounts emphasizing divine sovereignty and holiness. Lethal outcomes like Uzzah's death can serve as theological emphasis on reverence and obedience rather than empirical reports of an energy phenomenon. Psychological factors, acoustic effects during ritual, or simply narrative devices to teach covenant fidelity all remain plausible, perhaps more likely, explanations. Beyond theories about stored charge, the ark's ritual handling offers a clear, sober account of how ancient Israel attempted to manage the dangers and holiness attached to this object. The law prescribes a strict protocol. The ark was to be carried with poles inserted through rings in its sides, so that it would rest on the shoulders of the Levites, Numbers 4:15. The Levites were consecrated for this task. Others were expressly forbidden from touching the holy things. The ark itself was sometimes covered with protective cloths and skins when moved, and when it was in the most holy place, the inner sanctuary of the tabernacle, or later the temple, only the high priest entered that room, and only once a year on Yom Kippur, after elaborate rituals of purification and atonement, Leviticus 16. The Yom Kippur rite, in which the high priest entered the Holy of Holies, sprinkled blood, and burned incense on the mercy seat, carries an intense sense of risk. The high priest prepared with fasts, sacrifices, and garments, because proximity to the divine presence carried existential danger. The biblical language is not legalistic hair-splitting alone. It is a cultivation of boundaries meant to preserve holiness and to teach a people about the seriousness of covenant. The episode of Uzzah, recounted in the context of King David transporting the ark to Jerusalem, is among the most dramatic examples of the intersection of ritual law and human error. The ark had been placed on a cart by the house of Abinadab, and as the wagon jolted, Uzzah reached out to steady the ark. The text states that the Lord struck him down for his irreverent act. The scene has been read and reread in Jewish and Christian traditions as a warning about casual familiarity with the sacred. It is also, in the historical critical perspective, an instance that reveals tensions between folk practice and priestly law. Not everyone in Israel knew or honored the precise regulations about carriers and coverings, and the narrative presses that disjunction uncomfortably. Whether one reads this as theologically didactic or as evidence of physical danger, or both, the incident underscores that the ark's use was governed by a strict ritual economy. The ark's role in warfare adds another layer to its practical and symbolic functions. When the Israelites marched around Jericho, priests carried the ark and sounded trumpets. The narrative credits the fall of the walls to divine action associated with those rituals. In these episodes, the ark seems to function as a visible covenantal standard, a focus for communal faith. At times, however, reliance on the ark without corresponding moral or ritual fidelity results in disaster. The Philistine capture mentioned earlier serves as a cautionary tale. The ark did not function as a magical guarantee of success, divorced from ethical and ritual obligations. The Philistine narratives further describe physical phenomena that made the ark unbearable in their cities. Tumors and mice in some tellings, a hand of the Lord striking down the Philistines in others, phenomena that ancient writers attribute to divine retribution. Modern scholars advise caution. Epigraphic and archaeological correlation for specific battlefield events is difficult, and competing chronologies and interpretive traditions complicate direct historicization of these accounts. Many historians treat the narratives as theological literature that co-opts memory of real conflicts into theological meaning. After centuries of cultic centrality, first housed in the tabernacle, then brought into the tent of meeting at Shiloh, later captured and recovered, carried to Jerusalem where David danced before it, and finally installed in the temple that Solomon built, the ark's public biography abruptly narrows. By the time of the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem in 586 BCE, the ark disappears from the biblical record. The Babylonians destroyed the temple, exiled much of Judah's elite, and carried off treasures recorded in the Chronicles, but there is no unambiguous contemporaneous Babylonian record of a captured ark. This disappearance is the hinge on which centuries of speculation turn. Three broad theories dominate modern discussion. The first theorized end is destruction or loss during the Babylonian sack. Proponents point to the violent and thorough nature of the conquest and the absence of the ark in later temple inventories. It is possible that the ark was looted and melted down for its gold, smashed or otherwise disposed of in the chaos of conquest. Evidence for this position is primarily negative. There is no surviving textual or archaeological proof of the ark beyond the exile. But it remains a sober candidate. Many cultic objects do not survive violent upheavals. A second theory proposes that the ark was hidden deliberately by temple custodians before the fall, secreted in a chamber beneath the temple precincts, concealed in a cistern, or set aside in a safe place in the hills. The biblical writers themselves hint at such possibilities elsewhere. Other cultic treasures are described as being hidden. Some traditions within Judaism and some modern investigators suggest that priests removed the ark to protect it, perhaps to a subterranean vault under the Temple Mount or to other secret locations in Jerusalem. Archaeological investigation of the Temple Mount, however, is fraught with political, religious, and ethical constraints. Excavations are limited. The area is one of the most sensitive in the world, and therefore direct archaeological confirmation of a hidden ark is effectively blocked. That proximity to an answer makes this hypothesis attractive to some and frustratingly unprovable to most. The third prominent tradition moves the ark far from Jerusalem: the Ethiopian claim. For centuries, the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum has professed to house the ark under the guardianship of a single monk, the custodian, who is said to be the only person permitted to see or touch it. Ethiopian Christian tradition traces the ark's journey to Ethiopia via Menelik I, a legendary son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, who, according to the Kebra Nagast, brought the ark to Aksum. Ethiopian custodial claims are ancient and sincere, and they have become a vital part of Ethiopian religious identity. From a scholarly standpoint, however, the claim is contested. there is no independent archaeological or textual corroboration that verifies the identity of that object as the biblical ark, and outside researchers have largely been denied access. The Ethiopian tradition is therefore an enduring and culturally significant claim, worthy of respect and further study, but it remains contested and not empirically proven. These three broad tendencies, destruction, hiding in Jerusalem, and transfer to Ethiopia, are not exhaustive, and variants include theories of secret removal to other locations or dispersal of parts. Alongside these, 20th century rumors fed by excavation denial and modern fascination have produced a carnival of additional claims. Nazi expeditions sought cultic artifacts in the 1930s and 1940s. Explorers and seekers in more recent times have alleged discoveries in caves or remote sites. Rabbis and mystics have offered theological readings that treat the ark's absence as sign and symbol. Serious scholarship sits apart from sensational rumor, preferring to weigh textual testimony, archaeological context, and the strict limits of evidence. Importantly, practical politics restrict much investigative work on the Temple Mount and in other sensitive locales, so some avenues of potential discovery remain, for the time being, closed. Throughout this inquiry, we must keep a steady epistemic distinction. What the ancient texts assert as part of their theological narrative, what artisanship and ancient Near Eastern craft knowledge make plausible, and what modern physical hypotheses might add as speculative models. The biblical texts present the ark as an object of holiness, with precise manufacture, potent presence, and a demand for ritual respect. Archaeology and material studies can plausibly reconstruct a manufacturing process. Acacia core, thin overlay of beaten gold, rings and poles, cherubim lid, and can explain why the object required ritualized handling and why it served as a powerful political religious symbol. Modern speculative theories that liken the ark to an electrical capacitor are intriguing because they offer naturalistic analogies for the text's vivid reports of lethal contact. Yet these theories remain speculative. They cannot displace the primary theological meaning the ancient communities attached to the ark, nor can they be established with the kind of experimental evidence modern science would require. A responsible synthesis therefore treats the capacitor analogy as a provocative interpretive lens, not as proof. What then is the truth behind the ark? We can say with reasonable confidence several things. The ark was described in the biblical tradition with exacting dimensions and materials. It was made of acacia wood overlaid with gold, fitted with rings and poles, and topped with a mercy seat and cherubim. It was crafted by skilled artisans. Names such as Bezalel and Oholiab anchor the story in charismatic competence, and it held the tablets of the law, Aaron's rod, and a jar of manna, objects of central theological meaning. The ark occupied a central place in Israelite cultic life, was carried and displayed in moments of national trauma and triumph, and served as a focus for narratives about covenantal presence and divine judgment. Beyond those points, reasonable and variously supported hypotheses exist about the ark's physical properties and its disappearance, but none of them compel singular acceptance. The ark remains therefore both an engineering curiosity and a sacred symbol. Its construction showcases ancient expertise and the mobilization of material resources and human skill under a script of divine instruction. Its use ranges from the intensely ritual, the guarded presence in the Holy of Holies and the Yom Kippur rites, to the highly public, the marches at Jericho and the displays in battle, illuminating the interface between religion, politics, and memory. And its final fate teaches modern readers about the limits of historical recovery. Some objects vanish into the rubble of conquest or into guarded tradition, leaving only converging testimonies, variant legends, and hypotheses that reflect our own technological imaginations as much as ancient reality. If this exploration has sparked your curiosity about ancient craft, sacred technology, and the mysteries that survived the centuries, stick around and watch our deep dive on how Solomon built the temple. There's more on materials, artisans, and ritual practice there. The Ark of the Covenant remains an enigma that resists easy categorization, an object of precise workmanship and of decisive theological meaning, a container of relics and of presence, an artifact that prompts both reverence and scientific curiosity. In a world that often separates engineering from worship, the Ark stands as a reminder that human skill and religious imagination were, for the ancient Israelites, inseparable. If you want to keep exploring these intersections of history, craft, and faith, subscribe and watch the linked video on Solomon's Temple to go deeper into the story.